All right. Well, it's good to see you guys. I haven't been down here for a while. It's been missed y'all. But last week was virtues, right? Morality and virtues, right? That was the first one, right? Yeah, mostly morality. Okay, mostly morality, a little bit of virtue. Okay. So last week is when we started the third kind of pillar of the catechism. So if you're kind of I think it's always important to connect everything, and I'm sure they did last week. Is we did the first part is the creed, is what we believe. Then you celebrate how do we celebrate that through the liturgy and the sacraments. And now we're focusing on how do you live out what you believe, right, on a day-to-day basis. Because as St. Paul just wrote about, it's one thing to say, yeah, I got it, but then you got to go do it. That's the hard part, unfortunately, in the world. And over the next few weeks, we're going to be breaking open the contemporary issues of morality, and by using the commandments as a framework. That's what the Catechism does, is uses the 10 Commandments as a framework to discuss all the moral issues. So this is really a great time for you, especially to bring your questions, because some of the social teachings and hot topic things the church teaches on, because we're going to be covering all those over the next few weeks. But today we want to kind of set the stage for that, and it was connected to last week. And first, we have to acknowledge that if there is a certain way to live, where does that come from? Because the answer to that question actually will fundamentally change how you respond to everything else, right? You can say, don't do this or do this, but if you question the authority of those statements to begin with, everything is going to lose its grounding, right? So today is about that. Where does the sense of what is right and what is wrong come from? And then how do we actually do it? Because in the world today, it's very challenging when faced with situations. How do we respond to those things? So today, imagine, is like laying the foundation for the conversations we'll have next about what is right and what is wrong based off the framework of the commandments. All right? So let me start off. I'm going to pull off from the Catechism, a lot of scripture today. But let me start off with this quote from, again, if you take notes or anything, I really encourage you. There's a lot in this section of the Catechism that's beautiful, and that's worth reading on your own. But this is a selection from paragraph 1949. And this is foundational. This is key. We're called to beatitude. We're called to joy. We're called to happiness. We're called to eternal life. But our human condition is wounded by sin. All right? Which basically is simply saying that we're called to one thing, but we kind of keep messing things up. All right? And I can at least attest that is true for me in my life. So we need salvation. And this has been the story of Christianity so far. Well, how do we get that? So then God comes, divine help comes for us through Christ, through the law, right? And immediately we say that word law, we're like, ew, right? Oh no, rules and all these things. And that's what today is going to be about, the law. What do we mean by the law that guides us, and then the grace that is given to sustain us to actually live it out? So notice that the connection from salvation is directly connected to the law given to us, and like how we're going to live this out. And this is what we're going to be. So first off, I have a question for you. This is a very loaded question, okay? So I hate to set you up this way. We're coming right out the Baz box today, all right? Hope you're ready. So we're going to have a little table discussion, all right? Now, there are two competing worldviews out there right now. And it's the church has a very strong stance in this, but I really want you to be honest right now. That's the key, is be honest, wherever you stand on this. So there's one view of morality, and I would say that's probably the majority right now in our world, which basically says that morals, what is right and what is wrong, is relative. That is not a fixed thing, that changes with time and culture and on your perceptions on the world, and it's relative, right? You do you, I'll do me, and as long as we don't hurt anybody, we're okay. All right, that's one worldview. And then there's a separate worldview that says morality is not relative, that is absolute, that it is fixed, that is not something that we can choose what is right and wrong, no matter the time and culture we live in, but there are fixed things that are right and wrong. So my first question to you is, which one do you seems to be correct? Or which one do you more align with, and why? Okay, no judgment here, like St. Paul just said. I want to hear, what do you honestly think? Is morality, what is right and wrong, a fixed thing, or is that a relative that's fluid based on time and culture? All right? Got it? Y'all ready? Rip the Band-Aid off? Y'all look excited this morning. We're gonna pep it up. Some juicy conversation right at the bat. You ready? All right. Somebody's got to rip the Band-Aid off and start talking. That's how it works, okay? All right. Let's see. We got team members at most tables. I think over there. That's on team. Y'all want to condense maybe? Y'all want to combine? I don't know if it's, so I'll let y'all make a decision. So, all right. Ready? Go. Okay. So, like everything we seem to say in here, this conversation's way bigger than like 45, 50 minutes, okay? So we can't get bogged down in the details of certain situations because that's not the goal of today. It's meant to lay the foundation, okay? And we're going to talk about those things like over the next few weeks, the specific situations and how the church has understood those. But first off, we got us to this place of relativism versus absolute truth. And the church teaches and always consistently teaches, and this is very important because if we don't have this understanding, then everything else will fall apart. Because you can choose this not to believe that because I don't think that's right. That morality, what is right and wrong, okay, in terms of your actions, is not something that we can change. That is not something that we can decide upon. That is something that has been given to us by God and that we must cooperate with. So the church is very much saying that there is absolute truth, that there is absolute truths that are right and that they're wrong. Now, this, again, we're going to go into specifics on topics, right? But to talk, like I was interested earlier, having a conversation over here about like killing someone. And there is a distinction between self-defense and the murder of an innocent person, right? So that doesn't mean there's relativism there, but there is an absolute truth of these things. So as we go on, we're going to talk about these other objects, being concepts. But the church is simple. It says that morality, what is right and what is wrong, is not something that we choose, but it has been received from God. It's been given to us. And if you think about this for a second, you go back into Genesis chapter 3, we talk about the fall. This is something I think is always very fascinating. Because of all the ways that Adam and Eve could have fell, they chose to eat from one tree that they weren't supposed to eat from. And that was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And we all might think, well, it was a sin of disobedience. Absolutely. It was like, God said, don't touch the big purple button. And they're like, touch the purple button, right? But it's deeper than that. Because why that tree? The knowledge of good and evil. So in the sense, Adam and Eve were eating from that tree and trying to take for themselves to choose what is good and what is evil. By doing that, they are making themselves their own gods, that they can choose what's right and what's wrong. And you think about our society today, it is no different. That is the war that's happening. You do you, but don't impose what you think is right and wrong on me, because I can choose what's right and wrong. Well, the reality is, though, where does that end? Where does that end? And we're seeing the effects of that in our society right now, and the ends are becoming pretty crazy, right? So this is a battle. This is a battle. And the church describes law, in a sense, as the rules of conduct that lead to the promised beatitude, heaven, and the ways of evil which man turn away from God and his love. And I would add to this that the way the eternal beatitude, we think of that as heaven, but it's also meant to be now, right? Like Jesus didn't just say, live a miserable life and get to heaven. That was not the gospel. The gospel is John chapter 10, verse 10 says, I've come to give you life and give you life abundantly. That like this framework, these guidelines of how to live is actually going to bring you joy and actually give you freedom so you can live an authentic life and not be chained down by the world. So that when the suffering and the struggles come, you're still free and you're still able to face that with joy. And they will, but you're going to live an abundant life now. And then it's even way cooler in heaven. Okay? That's the idea. So this idea of law, all right, what are these rules of conduct? So I'm going to give you, this is very like teachy today, but I think it's worth looking at. We can look at law like this, all right? Pretty simple. Two kind of categories. First off, we have to acknowledge the top part. And I mean, this is where culture would say this is wrong from the beginning, all right? Eternal law is that God is the source of all morality, of what is right and what is wrong. That has been given to us. So we're going to accept that today and move forward from there. That's the moral absolutism that we talked about, not relativism. And then we can see, well, how do we know what's right and wrong? And our church's tradition has generally developed this up into two categories. First, what's called natural law, over to the left. We'll talk about that first. And then revealed law, what has been given to us by God. And that can even be broken down further into two kind of categories. The old law, which is summarized in the Ten Commandments, and then the new law in Jesus Christ, who fulfilled it and kind of raised the bar a little bit, okay? So that's where we're at. So let's go ahead and first talk about the natural law. So in Scripture, if you have your Bible with you or you have your phone, I want you to read along with me with this one because it's worth reading. It's something to write down, taking notes. Go to the book of Romans. So it's what we read this morning. We're going to continue on for a couple of passages. Okay, so we're going to Romans chapter 2. So remember, you can take your Bible or you open up your phone and just go to usccb.org, United States Conference of Catholic Bishops.org, usccb.org/Bible. And we're going to go to Romans 2. We're going to start with verse 12. Chapter 2, verse 12. So this morning we finished with verse 11. That was where we stopped. So we're going to continue on, okay? So Romans chapter 2, verse 12. Again, I'm sorry, I'm reading from a RSV, which is a slightly different translation than the one you're probably reading on your phone. Verse 12. All who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. And all who have sinned under the law will be judged by the law. First, he's speaking about the Mosaic law here, so we'll talk more about that in a minute. So let's think about the Ten Commandments. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. When Gentiles who have not the law do by nature what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that what the law requires is written on their hearts. Verse 15. They show what the law requires is written on their hearts. So what is St. Paul's talking about right here? I'm going to give you a ridiculous example. You ready? So bear with me. Let's say you go into the grocery store one day. Go to H-E-B, Kroger, I don't know, whatever side of the fence you're on, all right? And you walk in, and you see a family, and they have one child. And the child is, let's say young. And the child is, kind of crying a little bit, but not bad. It's like, it seemed like a little upset. And then all of a sudden you hear a loud noise, and you turn around, and you see one of the parents have hit the child, like hard. Can you feel the tense in the room right now, right? Why is that? Why is it tense in here right now? Why all are you on like, why? Because we all know it's what? Wrong, right? And you ask any sane, normal person in the world if that's okay, they're going to tell you that's wrong. That you should not hit an innocent child. Shouldn't hit any child, but particularly an innocent child, a young child, right? So what St. Paul's getting at right here is that there are things that are written on the human heart that by the very nature of being human, by having a mind, an intellect, and a will to choose, by the very thing of being human, we know some things are right and wrong. You ask any normal person, they would say that, they get squirmy about that because they know it's not okay. That is what's called natural law. Natural law is the law that God has given to humanity that is written on our hearts, okay, in our nature, where we can perceive what is right and wrong just by being human. God didn't need to reveal anything to us. And we're not going to give a list of these things, but these are pretty much summarized in the Ten Commandments, right? You can see this. Don't kill innocent people. That's what, right? Don't commit adultery. Like, don't steal things. Don't lie. Like, the normal human being knows not to do these things. Okay, now we're not talking about we'll talk in a second about why it seems so messed up. But this is natural law, all right, and it's been developed by Catholic theologians over the centuries in many different ways, particularly by our patron saint, St. Thomas Aquinas, has an incredible discussion on this. But because we are sinners, and because of original sin, and because of our struggles, this can get darkened. And we've all experienced this. We know this, this is, And I am 1,000,000% included in this conversation. Like we go to do something and we know it's wrong, but we do it anyway, right? We've all been there. And that's because original sin has darkened our intellect and our will. That we can't perceive what is right and wrong as clearly anymore, and then we don't have the power to do what's right and wrong anymore. That's what St. Paul writes about being enslaved to sin. Natural law. But the truth is, though, is that this is universal, unchangeable, and permanent. That everybody is affected by natural law. Not affected is the wrong word, but is a part of it. No matter what country you were born in, no matter how you were raised, natural law exists. There are some things written in our heart that are right and wrong. So that's the, think of it as the first side. Now, God did not leave it like that, though, because God is a good teacher. So he has also revealed to us what is right and what is wrong. He has told us throughout human history. And this is where Christianity is very different than other religions. Because it's not that we believe in a God who is out there. We believe that God, the creator of all things, has acted within human history in his words and in his deeds, has done things that we use to teach us. That's very unique. That's very unique. And that's what Christianity is all about. So if you made that little graph I had, you had law, natural law over here, then you have revealed law. So revealed means God has said things or done things and showed us what is right and wrong. And that can be further broken down into two categories. So the first one is called the old law. The old law. And the old law, think 10 Commandments here. So if you go back and read the book of Exodus, the book of Exodus describes how the Israelites were freed from slavery from Egypt. They went out to Mount Sinai. Moses went up to the mountain, lightning and thunder, and they made a covenant. And then God gave them some laws. If you read in Exodus, it's around Exodus chapter 20 to like 23, I believe. It's the first set of laws. And there were three types of law, three different types of law you could think of. The first one was liturgical, or like sacrificial. How do we sacrifice to God and worship him? That was one little set of law. And then there was like the judicial or the civil law. Like how do we govern Israelite society, right? How do you pay back things and stuff like this? But then there was a law about what to do, what's right and what's wrong, the moral law. And this is basically summarized in the 10 Commandments. So when we use the word law, that's what we're talking about right now, is the moral law, the old moral law. And these were accessible to by natural law. Like man should have known better. Don't kill innocent people. Who'd have thunk it, right? Don't steal people's stuff. Don't cheat on your wife or your husband with someone else, right? Honor God. Don't use his name in vain. You sit there and think about him like, man, like we should be doing this. We should do these things, right? But we still struggle with them today. These were accessible by natural law, but God revealed them to the Israelites and to us today. But this is crucial, that the old law is the first step, okay? Because what is the title of God most clearly talked about through Jesus? He speaks of God as our Father. Now, there's many characteristics of a good father, but one of them is that they are a teacher. And you got to think that as God as Father changes the way that we can look at him as the all-powerful creator. Because he took humanity, think of him as children, and what was right and wrong was written on their hearts. And then as humanity has progressed as a whole, as children, as teenagers, he gave them some more. He gave them some more. But it would be the equivalent of like me and my daughter. I have 4 children, my oldest one, coming to me and asking me a question about, or not even asking her, like me teaching her about sexuality things, my 5-year-old, or trying to teach to her about a complex issue that's way above her yet. She's not ready for it. She wouldn't be ready to handle those kind of understandings yet. In the same way, God has been slowly preparing his people, and this is called God's pedagogy, the way he teaches humanity. So think of the old law as the first stage of revealed law. Its function was to denounce and to disclose sin, to tell you, don't do that. That's bad. And that's like with my children, I tell them, don't touch the stove. Don't run into the street. Don't pick up the knife, right? Because those things are bad for you. And we don't want you to get hurt. So the old law, in this sense, the 10 Commandments, are the list of the don't do's. Don't do these things because these are bad for you, and you're going to get hurt. But they didn't give the grace yet to live them out. They were, imperfect's the wrong word, but we needed some more. But God was preparing us. It would be like me trying to teach my 4-year-old why a stove gets hot and how heat can burn you, and going through this complex situation, or talking to her why you should not engage in sexual activity until you're married, to my 4-year-old. That would be inappropriate. She's not there yet. So there was a next step to come. And this came in what is called the new law. The new law. And the new law was given to us through Jesus Christ. The new law is the law of the gospel. It fulfills and brings to fulfillment, right, what the old law was meant to do. So this would be example, my daughter, who's young, my 4-year-old, I tell her, don't touch that hot thing. That's telling her what not to do. But as my children get older, I'm going to teach them, you actually can put on gloves on oven mitts, and you can grab it now, but be careful and do the right thing, right? Don't run in the street. My 2-year-old, that's all you can say. Don't run in the street because you might get hit by a car. It's bad for you. But as my kids get older, I teach them how to cross the street. Look both ways. Stop. If a car is coming, don't move and wait. Now notice that I didn't change the law. I fulfilled its purpose. The purpose of the purpose of my law saying don't run in the street wasn't because they couldn't cross the street. The purpose of the law was that they wouldn't get hurt. You see what I'm saying? And now as they're older and can handle more, I can teach them what the law was meant to do so that they can cross the street safely. And that's what the new law is. It's not just the don't do's, it's the do's on how to live life most abundantly. But the catch is that not only does the new law tell you how to live life abundantly, it actually gives us the grace to do it. It's God's divine help to actually live this out. It's the law of love. Jesus summarized the new law very simply. They're like, what's the greatest commandment, teacher? And Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. All the law and the commandments can be summarized with that. Now, upon hearing that, you're like, well, that's easy. That's, of course, you ask anybody, they're going to tell you that. But it goes back to how do you define love? That's the word. We're going to talk a lot about this in a few weeks when we talk about Commandments 6 and 9. But it's worth mentioning here. We can, and we'll talk more later, but we can all actually, what is love? We'll all have different answers. But love is not meant simply to be an emotion, a feeling. Love is an action. It's something that you do. And when Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you, he was not simply talking about healing people. He was not simply talking about the miracles that he worked. This was in relation to that, the cross. To love someone is to sacrifice for them. To love someone is who you're willing to give up your life for. Not just your physical life, but maybe it's the things that you want to do. Sacrifice. That is love. Love is equal to sacrifice. I do this, like, we'll talk about this with like my high school students, and I'll have them, I'll close your eyes. And I ask, who are you willing to sacrifice for? We have, who are you willing to sacrifice for? And I say, open them. It's like, that's who you love. Right? That's who you love. That's real love. Because you can say, I love you, but when you put your own needs before them, It's not love. Love is meant to be sacrifice. So Jesus is saying, love God. Put him first before you. Love your neighbor. Put them before you. Sacrifice for them before you. And you think about it. If that's what it comes down to, take all the 10 commandments. Take them all and plug them into those. We're going to talk about commandments 1 and 3. Love the Lord your God. That fits 1. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. That's clearly number 1. I'm not going to curse at God if I'm putting him first. Rest on the Sabbath. Think about 4 through 10. We're going to go through them. Honor your father and mother. That's putting neighbors before you. Don't kill somebody. That's clearly putting their neighbor before you. Don't lie. Don't steal. Don't cheat. That's clearly putting people before you. Jesus, like, this is what it's meant to be. Like, love God, love your neighbor, sacrifice for others, and you are fulfilling the law. And if you really think about all the moral situations that we're angry about and struggle in the world, if we approach them with a lens like that, the answers can become so much clearer. Put others' needs before you. Not necessarily what we want, but what's good for the other. That's love. That's love. We'll talk more about that in a few weeks. So the new law, in the sense to think about it, is the positive. It's not simply don't do, it's the what to do. Not simply the don't do, but the what to do. And God gives us grace. He gives us grace to actually do it. Now, we talked about grace when we discussed the sacraments, but the sacraments are one way that we get this grace. Grace is God's divine life in us. So there's lots of different ways in the catechism. If you go back and read the catechism paragraphs on grace, which we won't do here, but it talks about different ones. But the idea is that God will actually give us the help we need to live this out, right? And some of them comes through the sacraments. When we receive a certain sacrament, we're given the grace to do better. Doesn't mean we're not going to fall again, but we get better. But when we continue with this, God helps us. Where the old law simply said, don't do this stuff, the new law says, do these things, and I'm going to help you. And I'm going to help you. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change gears a bit, and I want to, before we have a discussion, and I want to show part of a Catholicism video on some of Jesus' teachings of the new law. And these are very, very beautiful. It's better than I could talk about them. But there are various, couple of different situations. We're only going to watch probably about half of it due to time. But I want you to think about how the new law changes what was expected, okay, particularly when it comes to 2. So we're going to watch one about the Beatitudes, and then one about the path of nonviolence, how Jesus tells you to turn the other cheek. What does that mean, right, in a couple of ways. And Bishop Barron does a much better job than me. So that being said, give us a few moments while I transition, and we're going to watch a bit up here.